Spring means not only hope, but also certainty. For once the buds sprouted and the delicate petals of the flowers begin smiling to the sun every morning, the countdown to the moment when everything blows up into a fairy-like raw green can be stopped no more. Similarly, the Ialomitei river water cannot be stopped from its endless flow, regardless of the season. The climate is temperate continental at plain level, with high thermal contrast between winter and summer, with average rainfall of up to 550 millimeters, an annual mean temperature of 10–11 degrees Celsius, and frequent periods of dryness and drought. Barely broken off the winter numbness, the flora and fauna of the corridor starts waking up to life again. Sprung from the rocks of the Bucegi Mountains, the Ialomitei water crosses the plain in a winding riverbed, finding its rest only 400 kilometers lower in the welcoming arms of the Danube. Surrounded by the forest that ensures its specific microclimate, the Lady's Pond is part of the specially protected area from the Ialomitei corridor. A new generation begins to shyly discover the world. When the last snow melts, the overflow of the water in the flood zone of the corridor is a real blessing for the whole biodiversity of this protected area. It is a place which offers plenty of food and ensures the shelter of the living beings here. While the encounter with the deer is not a surprise. Much less for the rangers of the park that permanently monitor the 27,000 hectares of the Ialomitei corridor that crosses the territory of two counties, Prahova and Ialomitei. In its winding way toward the Danube, the Ialomitei crosses the plain of Baragan, a region whose name comes from the Turkish Cumanian name, meaning arid, barren land. That's why the river water is a real life-giving spring for this dry region, most of its watercourse being guarded by robust clusters of trees. The site represents the most important ecological corridor crossing Baragan, developed from west to east, the Ialomitei being the only river in the region which, under the influence of the movement of the earth crust, underwent displacements from the initial place of formation. Thus, the Ialomitei and its main tributaries connect the Danube meadow to the region of fieldwoods and hills, wetting the driest region of the country, the plain of Baragan. In these mazes of greenery flanking the Ialomitei river in its way through the plain of Baragan, life is following its own rhythms and ancient rituals. Deaf to whatever happens around them, the roebucks enter the mating period. In fact, a fierce fight began, for each male will want his genes to be found in the future generation that will take over these wild places. And nature there can be only one winner. Here the spring buds, drawing their sap from the Ialomitei water, have just sprouted, revealing the green leaves. Located on the left bank of the Ialomitei, the Chulnica ravines seem a fortification raised on a single bank of the river, like a long wall that guards over the field and that stretches southwards. The soils are predominantly made of Chernozem, very fertile, with a high content of humus, while the groundwater is at about 15-20 meters deep. It is a relatively flat land, strewn with many tablelands and ravines, covered by a layer of loess between 10 and 40 meters deep. The Ialomitei ends its life-giving journey in the whirling Danube water, where the willow twigs have just turned green and rock in the strong winds on the banks of Vardului. The summer drought will now take hold of the Ialomitei corridor. In a gravel excavation now abandoned, there happened one of the miracles which you usually pass by without noticing. After 200 years from its disappearance, the beaver has returned to its natural habitat. We are in full summer, and under the scorching heat of the sun, the Ialomitei corridor remains a green oasis stretching along Baragan. The meadow is 4 to 6 kilometers wide, clearly asymmetrical, more developed on the left side, while the minor riverbed is situated immediately under the right bank. The corridor constitutes a preserved place of bird populations for a long time. Having a bird's eye view, the Lady's Pond is surrounded by forests, like some fortress walls. Under the canopy of trees, the place teems with life, and undoubtedly is a small earthly paradise. The birds took over both the gloss of the water and the heavenly vault. Due to a permanent observation and monitoring, we are uncovering now the real dimension of the biodiversity of the Ialomitei corridor. The Ialomitei continues quietly its relentless way through the sunburned plain, being a source of life for all the animals and habitats that surround it. Following the slow course of the water, we reach a picturesque place situated near Chulnica. The ravines here, bizarre and spectacular geological formations, imposingly guard the left bank of the river, being an excellent watching point of the whole plain stretching below. Redu water storage was created here, where the Prakova River flows into the Ialomitei. From here onwards, the Ialomitei lazily winds under the crowns of the trees, which unite above the water in a green embrace. Wildlife observation is much more difficult now because of the vegetation, but the waiting hours and a bit of luck will bring us again the confirmation of the diversity and vigor of the fauna populating this protected area. Life follows its course and cycles under the magic green arcades, always the same, while the presence of predators is a certainty of the soundness of these habitats. Flowing into the Danube, the Ialomitei brings in the river deposits accumulated on its 400 kilometers long way. It is a natural phenomenon which increases when there are heavy rains or dust storms, specific to Baragan, falling on the regions crossed by the river. The wind intensified, the temperatures dropped significantly, while the forest gradually puts on its multicolored autumn dress. Observing and monitoring the biodiversity of the Ialomitei corridor protected area continue, regardless of the season. An efficient method is using surveillance cameras on a large scale, which will give rangers information that otherwise is hard to get in normal conditions of monitoring or direct observation. But direct visual contact is better, mainly due to the feeling. What else can be more touching than meeting directly any of the creatures living here, a place where we can only be temporary visitors? As the night bustle in the middle of the forest does not cease, the thermal cameras are the feline eyes of the park administration. The site is particularly important due to its specific habitats for river meadows, as in this protected area we frequently meet clusters of willows, grey oaks and poplars, meadow roads with pedunculate oaks, riverside coppices with poplars and willows, waterside vegetation and water-loving grass communities. Each living being is now ready to confront the frost that is about to come, while the migratory species have already left to warmer places from where they will return in the next spring, leaving room to their winter guests. The corridor crossed by the Ialomitei River is mentioned in Strabo's writings, the founder of geography, as a sacred river of the jetty that springs from the holy mountain Cogaion, known today as the Buceci. The sacredness of the river is demonstrated by its name given by the old Dacians, Napares, meaning divine, and later Helivakia, which is supposed to be directly connected to Helles, the fortress of the Dacian king Dromichete. The Ialomitei Valley has been an important route for flock moving. The Sheep's Road, starting in the Carpathians and going down the river meadow to the Danube. The flocks then crossed the Danube at Vaduoi, meaning the ford of the sheep, and spent winter in the warmer regions near the Black Sea. The birds nest here. Others find feeding places, raise their young and migrate, and some species spend their winter in the region after coming from very cold areas of the globe. Nature warms itself in the gentle rays of the sun before winter is coming. Autumn ends once the water of the Ialomitei, made muddier by the autumn rains, flows into the Danube. Somewhere far away, You hear the old wind starting to whistle while getting nearer. You can smell the winter in the air. The first snow drifted the Ialomitei banks, while the frozen wind scattered continually the snow laid overnight on the Baragan plain. The snake-like course of the river is winding, squeezing through the clusters of trees. The specially protected area of the Ialomitei corridor, managed by the National Administration of Forests through the Natural Park of Broila Small Pond, is a place apart. We have learned along this trip how frail the balance of a habitat is, and chiefly that man's intervention can also be beneficial, protecting the ecosystems, not just destructive. Though it is located only a few kilometers away, and sometimes not even that much, from important urban centers such as the country's capital Bucharest or the cities of Ploiești and Slobozia, the Ialomitei corridor is a little-known zone by the general public. Probably this aspect also came as a help for the park administration, which succeeded in preserving this area so well. Even though the snow covered the corridor along and across, the observation and monitoring activities do not stop. Placed in the area of trails and feeding spots, the surveillance cameras are permanently repositioned depending on the studied species. The information thus gathered is extremely useful in order to permanently have an overall opinion over the evolution of life in these habitats. The river mouth is the final point only of our journey. The story of the Ialomitei River will go on, with every generation belonging to the species of flora and fauna that will come, being the only masters of these places.
Proiect cofinanțat din Fondul European de Dezvoltare Regională prin Programul Operațional Infrastructură Mare 2014-2020.